Honorable Mahen Kumar Siratan, Minister of Financial Services and Good Governance, Mrs. Sheila Judah, Chief Executive Officer of the Mauritius Institute of Directors, Mr. Danny Balak, Chairperson of the MIoD, Mrs. Agunarada Kisun, Chairperson of the National Committee of Corporate Governance, Mr. Jean-Pierre Dalle, Chairperson of Business Mauritius and Group CEO of Ciel, Mrs. Namita Jagannath-Erdoor, President of the Mauritius Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Arnaud Lages, Group CEO at IBL, Ms. Fiona Jerdant, Senior Policy Analyst at OECD, founders, patrons, and members of the MIoD, members of the press, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, good morning again and welcome to Hennessy Park Hotel for this very special flagship event of the MIoD, which this year aligns with the 15-year anniversary of the Institute. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Nafisa, the Learning and Advocacy Manager at the Institute, as well as your MC for today. And it is my utmost pleasure to welcome you in this gorgeous setting this Thursday morning. We're very grateful to our sponsors, MCB, Absa Bank, Evaco, Mobank, Scott, and Axis, who have supported us in making today's event and the 15 years of the Institute a success. Practicing good corporate governance empowers businesses to establish vigorous policies, laying the foundation to increase transparency and sustainable good governance practices across operations, ultimately leading to opportunities for enhanced growth and improved performance. We are thus pleased to welcome you again to the second edition of the ACGC 2023. This flagship event once again brings together government, parastatal bodies, business sector leaders, and regulatory institutions for an annual exchange of insights, knowledge, and ideas that will drive governance excellence in the coming years. I am sure that the video showed just now gave you an overview on last year's edition, where in line with this mission, we had the opportunity to welcome around 200 participants, both face-to-face as well as online, to look at themes such as the ESG expectations of financial institutions and investors, the emerging geopolitical risk in corporate world, as well as risk governance. Does a compliance culture matter? Now, ladies and gentlemen, she's here to welcome you all today. With 24 years of experience in various key sectors, both local and on international markets, I now have the pleasure to call on stage Mrs. Sheila Judah, the CEO of the Institute, for her speech. If you could please join me, Sheila. Thank you.
Honorable Mahen Kumar Siratan, Minister of Financial Services and Good Governance, Fiona Jerdant, Senior Policy Analyst at the OECD, Danny Balak, Chairperson of the MIoD, board members and members of the MIoD, panel speakers, members of the press, esteemed guests, colleagues and friends, all protocol observed. A very good morning to you. It fills me with immense pride to stand before you today, not only as the CEO of the Mauritius Institute of Directors, but as a witness to this remarkable journey we had. We are not just convening the second annual Corporate Governance Conference, but we are celebrating a milestone, the 15th anniversary of the MIoD. And this is the moment to reflect, acknowledge, and to envision the path that lies ahead. It's a celebration of every challenge that has come to us, and every individual who has been an integral part of our pathway, which began in 2008 with a commitment to elevate corporate governance in both public and private sector. Nonetheless, celebrations should not make us forget our core responsibilities. And this is why we are here today. We are here to explore the future of corporate governance. The landscape before us is vast and ever-changing one, shaped by technological advances, global interconnectivity, and evolving expectations. And as we stand today at the crossroads of reflection and anticipation, our theme could not be more apt. It captures the essence of our endeavors to build a governance era that is not just relevant today, but resilient for the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. The first ACGC held in 2022 was a resounding success, and it marked a significant milestone in our collective pursuit of good corporate governance. The conference underscored the importance of collaboration between the public and the private sectors in shaping the future of corporate governance. It demonstrated our collective dedication to aligning with the best practices and standards, not only to boost Mauritius' reputation, but also to ensure the trust and confidence in Mauritius as an international financial center. In these fast evolving times, the ACGC is an ideal platform to share, discuss with, and support both the private and public sector. Reflecting, therefore, on the 15 years of excellence, let's propel corporate governance into the future. With integrity as our compass, innovation as our sail, we navigate the boundless sea of opportunities ahead. And looking towards the future, we are not merely passengers of this voyage. We are the captains of change. And as we look to compete and thrive in an increasingly complex domestic and global environment, we must discuss how corporate governance needs to evolve, and directors must be able to discern how global trends will affect their organization strategies and operations. Today's conference is a convergence of minds, a melting pot of ideas where we explore the frontiers of corporate governance and forge a path forward that transcends limits. For this second edition of the ACGC, let us carry forward the spirit of collaboration and the lessons learned from our past endeavors. We are thus honored to be joined by distinguished guests and thought leaders who will illuminate the ever-evolving landscape of corporate governance. We will discuss not only the theoretical underpinnings, but also delve into practical strategies that will enable us to navigate the complexities of this modern business world. I now invite you to watch a video marking the celebration of the 15th anniversary of the Institute with our founders, patrons and key stakeholders in both the public and private sector. been a priority for MIoD, and seeing our patrons and founders here present is a testimony of their trust in MIoD.
It's an important milestone in the life of the MIoD.
I think Maurice has done very well in terms of making sure that the governance is put at the forefront.
In terms of good corporate governance, MIoD has done so much, which we are very proud of.
And it is absolutely the right organization, well managed both at the governance level, staff level.
Companies have understood very well the importance of good corporate governance. And I think MIoD has been instrumental in training. It's very good for the country to have such an organization that is taking it so seriously. And we are very proud to see that what they have constructed over 50 years is starting from zero, and they have given a name to directorship, to governance.
It is very good for corporate Mauritius. It's certainly been a big contributor to the improvements in governance.
And doing good is not a destination but a journey. And corporate governance is very critical for sustainability of an ecosystem.
ESG is on everybody's lips at the moment. We're really at a turning point in terms of the climate agenda and things.
And I think it is absolutely laudable to see where the MIoD has reached today.
PwC has been involved with the MIE for a long time, and it's been great to see the journey that has been done.
Je partage tout le sentiment de ceux qui pendant ces 15 années ont œuvré pour bien établir l'institution, et je ne peux que souhaiter que les 15 prochaines verront davantage de développement.
Donc je pense que tout le monde a à cœur de faire progresser la gouvernance à Maurice. C'est absolument indispensable pour notre pays.
So I think it merits all the celebration that we are going to be doing tonight.
I'm very proud to have served as board member and chairperson of the MIoD. We definitely need to continue on the great momentum.
The kind of work MIoD is doing for the women directors, in terms of identifying directors, identifying women directors and all, that's amazing.
Et je voulais féliciter Sheila parce qu'elle est quand même vraiment la cheville ouvrière de tout ça, et elle arrive à mobiliser, à conscientiser, à mettre les sujets sur la table, à faire avancer.
And I must say, at the level of my ministry, which is also responsible to promote good governance, we are all aligned, and that is why I keep kind of, supporting them in what they do.
Really privileged to be here, and it's a huge pleasure to be part of this celebration. So a big well done to MIoD.
And my message to all the partners: be with us. We will continue that journey together to unparalleled heights of excellence. Ladies and gentlemen, this video is simply a testimony of our 15th anniversary, serving as a reminder that the strength of our institute lies in the passion and dedication of every individual who has contributed to our journey. So let our celebrations not just mark a commemoration of the past, but a commitment to the future. Stories will continue to be written, stories of innovation that redefine governance practices, stories of adaptability, forward thinking, and agility that meet the demands of a dynamic world, and stories of collaboration that bridge borders and industries. The future is not a distant horizon. It's the culmination of the choices we make today. And as we explore the future of the corporate governance through today's panel conversation, let us do so with the same spirit that has defined us for 15 years, a spirit of integrity, excellence, and a shared vision for a better tomorrow. Last but not least, I would like to thank all stakeholders, including our sponsors, namely MCP Group, ABSA, Care Ratings Africa, ABACO Group, Mobank, Scott Group, and Axis Mauritius, whose contributions were instrumental in making today's event a success. Thank you, and wishing you an inspiring conference. Thank you, Sheila, for this enlightening speech which gives us an orientation for the future of corporate governance. The MIoD remains committed to promoting corporate governance and contribute to sustainable development which benefits both businesses as well as the society. Our mission remains to provide a platform for both the public and private sector to discuss challenges and opportunities for the merchant business community. It is thus my utmost pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, the Honorable Mahen Kumar Siritan, Minister of Financial Services and Good Governance, for his speech. If you could please join me, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Danny Bullock, Chairperson of the MIoD, Mrs. Aruna Rodakisun, Chairperson of the NCCG, Mr. Jean-Pierre Dallet, Chairperson of the Business Mauritius and Group CEO of Sergroup, Mrs. Namita Ardua, President of the MCCI, Mr. Arnaud Dages, Group CEO of IBL, Mrs. Sheila Erjuda, CEO of the MIoD, Mrs. Fiona Jerdant, Senior Policy Analyst of the OECD, members and patrons of the MIoD, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. I wish first of all to thank the Mauritius Institute of Directors for the opportunity to address you this morning. And I stand before you today with a profound sense of purpose and resolve on the occasion of the second edition of the Annual Corporate Governance Conference. This gathering is a distinguished convergence of minds from public and private spheres for an annual exchange of insights, intelligence, and ideas. Gatherings such as these play an important role in charting the trajectory of governance excellence of this country. The notable presence of leaders gathered here today speaks volume on the palpable commitment that each of you bring to the cause. Your presence indeed signifies a shared resolve to elevate the governance standards of the country. Mauritius, true to its commitment to excellence, understands that robust corporate governance is a linchpin of investor confidence and the precursor of long-term economic stability. I extend therefore my gratitude to the MIoD for their tireless efforts in conceptualizing and organizing this flagship event. Only last week, we proudly celebrated MIoD's 15th anniversary. 15 years in serve to its members and the nation, empowering businesses to flourish responsibly and sustainably. Distinguished guests, this conference brings together the public and private sectors, and within this conference, the seeds of effective cooperation are sown, fostering an environment where good governance thrives on both sides. In this arena of intellectual exchange and collaboration, I take the opportunity of saluting the presence of esteemed public bodies and enterprising private sector participants. Mauritius needs the commitment of both public and private sector to sustain an effective AML CFT framework to further strengthen the reputation of the country as a credible and robust international financial center. Ladies and gentlemen, on Tuesday I met the board of the National Committee on Corporate Governance, and we discussed progress on various projects, among which the Corporate Governance Scorecard Assessment Exercise. I understand that the second report will be released next month. The Corporate Governance Scorecard puts Mauritius among the few countries in the world to measure progress in corporate governance practices in a quantitative manner. I strongly believe that year after year, as awareness of this tool gains traction across sectors of the economy, more and more corporates will subscribe to the exercise. I'm hopeful that the Corporate Governance Scorecard and its 66 indicators will give rise to a new type of corporate citizenship, consciousness in Mauritius. Smarter companies today recognize the incredible influence of this kind of transparency to drive trust and confidence among stakeholders, including investors and employees. These corporates are conscious of the need to guard their own reputational risk, and they know that good governance, which includes reporting on ESG issues, is for the social good. The other important task on the drawing board is a review of the Code on Corporate Governance. It is envisaged that the revised code will strengthen sustainability-related considerations. Compliance with a more exigent code will raise the bar of corporate governance standards much higher. It is also planned before the year comes to a close, the launch of a diversity, equality, and inclusion DI charter, right? This project endorses our commitment to progressively build a more diverse, equitable, inclusive, and sustainable business community and society. By signing up to the charter, organizations will commit to, inter alia, share with the NCCG their DI targets for the year. The NCCG will then produce periodically meaningful reports on where we are at the national level on the DI journey. We all play an ever-increasingly critical role to design and build sustainable organizations and ultimately the sustainable economy we so badly need. Ladies and gentlemen, going forward, there will be a razor-sharp focus on board composition, board quality, and board effectiveness. We should expect more scrutiny on issues such as independence, overboarding, excessive tenure, and diversity. We must be ready for higher levels of scrutiny and public oversight of boards and directors beyond anything we have experienced before. I am conscious that there are many more speakers lined up after me, so I will not be much longer. I have mentioned at the Forum of Accountants last week, as well as part of my interview for the MIoD, that in this world of constant flux, the way businesses are run and supervised has changed beyond recognition, with a significant rise of a strong corporate governance and conscience to do things the right way and the moral way. An age of open, accountable, and participatory governance, along with a culture of compliance, has emerged. We have no choice but to comply with new exigencies as they keep coming. Shareholders, investors, and customers' expectations will keep businesses on their toes to higher standards and seek increased transparency and accountability. I would wish here to repeat what I said in my interview. Whether public or private, transparency and integrity principles across the board and above the board. Plato said, and I quote, "We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light." End of quote. Distinguished guests, corporate governance is not an end. It is a means, but it is so much more than just the structure, processes, and rules of decision-making and controls. Good governance is a culture and a climate of responsibility, accountability, transparency, and effectiveness that is deployed throughout the organization. Ladies and gentlemen, corporate governance will soon become a global language for governments, regulators, the private sector, and other stakeholders in an increasingly interconnected world. The sooner we all learn to speak the language of governance, the earlier we shall reap the full benefits of the positive correlation between corporate governance and economic development. Distinguished guests, as I stand here before you, reflecting on the journey we have undertaken in the realm of corporate governance, I am also reminded of a pivotal moment that has left us indelible mark on this landscape. In 2016, during the formulation of the second code, a visionary leader stepped forward, embracing the challenge of fostering robust corporate governance in Mauritius. So thank you, Mr. Arnaud for your unwavering commitment and invaluable insights which were instrumental in shaping the foundation of our governance practices. So I wish the MIoD and its members all the very best on this exciting journey. So with these words, I thank you all for your kind attention.
May I please request you to stay with me on the stage? I would like to invite Mr. Danny Balak, the chairperson of the MIoD, and our sponsor and patron, KRA Greens Africa, represented by the CEO, Mr. Saurav Chatterjee, for a token of appreciation to the Minister for his support. You would also notice, ladies and gentlemen, that on your table we have the pleasure
to the Institute for organizing this impressive gathering Honorable Minister, Sheila, ladies and gentlemen, I really wish I could be with you in the room, but I'm very pleased to join you virtually from Paris. This annual conference comes at an opportune time when the OECD is expanding cooperation with Mauritius in the area of corporate governance as part of a wider effort to deepen engagement between the OECD and Africa. It is also timely as the revised G20 OECD Principles of Corporate Governance are just about to be publicly launched very shortly on the 11th of September, so please stay tuned. This morning, I'm delighted to share with you the main changes and highlight their relevance globally. As the Minister mentioned, we have all been grappling with rapid changes and major challenges in recent years, including growing impacts and concerns surrounding climate change, the rapid growth of digitalization, and geopolitical conflicts, which among other consequences are creating new uncertainties and vulnerabilities. These developments, of course, have a huge impact on the private sector, and I know there's a lot of corporates in the room, so this is no surprise to you, but this is putting corporations' adaptability and resilience to the test, and raising questions as to whether current frameworks for corporate governance remain fit for purpose. It is in this context that the OECD and our Corporate Governance Committee decided to undertake a comprehensive review of the G20 OECD Principles of Corporate Governance. The review started in November 2021. The new principles were approved by OECD ministers in June this year and endorsed by the G20 over the summer. Next slide, please. The significance of developing capital markets as a means of supporting economic development is increasingly being acknowledged in the Africa region. For instance, the Africa Union's Agenda 2063 prioritizes the development of capital markets on the continent to strengthen domestic resource mobilization and double its contribution to financing sustainable development. An important consideration to keep in mind when designing national policies is coherence. The fragmentation of capital market regulation can result in inefficiencies and cost increases for companies seeking to raise capital. This is true not just for firms operating in multiple jurisdictions, but also for new, innovative firms, which will have less financing available to invest and grow. Also, a major consideration for Mauritius is that the corporate governance framework should be flexible and proportional to meet the needs of companies of different sizes and complexity, as well as operating under different circumstances. This will also help to increase efficiency and prevent overregulation. The flexibility and proportionality that I just mentioned is actually a foundation of the G20 OECD Principles of Corporate Governance and explains their global relevance. The principles are globally relevant because they recognize that there is no single model of good corporate governance, neither for countries nor for companies, and that the outcomes they advocate can be achieved through different approaches, different policies, institutions, and laws. As a result, many countries outside the OECD and G20 use the principles to help them strengthen their own frameworks and national codes. And we hope this will also be the case as Mauritius embarks on its corporate governance code revision. The OECD Corporate Governance Fact Book, which we publish every 2 years, provides an example of how the principles are implemented across 50 economies. The next version is coming out actually in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that as well. Excuse me. The role of the principles is to help policymakers to evaluate and improve the legal, regulatory, and institutional framework for corporate governance. In fact, 53 jurisdictions have adhered to the principles, including all G20 and FSB, the Financial Stability Board members. Next slide, please. As you can see, well, in a minute, hopefully. Great. As you can see in the slide, the principles have 6 pillars, which are ensuring the basis for an effective corporate governance framework, the rights and equitable treatment of shareholders and key ownership functions, institutional investors, stock markets, and other intermediaries, disclosure and transparency. No, if you can go back, please. It's slide 3. The responsibilities of the board, and sustainability and resilience. So now the slide on the review of the principles. There we go. Perfect, thank you. I won't spend too much time on this because this is just about the process, but I wanted to show you the comprehensive approach we've taken to the revision. It was quite a intensive and extensive process. So this just gives you a glimpse, but I want to focus more on the content. So next slide, please. Now getting to the heart of the discussion. So this slide shows the 10 priority areas that the OECD Corporate Governance Committee identified for review. These priorities support a number of OECD and G20 strategic priorities, including managing the climate transition, supporting the digital transformation, and promoting a post-COVID recovery that is resilient and sustainable. Unfortunately, I won't have time to cover all of these in depth. I will focus on climate change and ESG risks, which has resulted in a new chapter on sustainability, and I will also highlight some of the other issues in a brief manner. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. The biggest change in the revised principles is the addition of a new chapter on sustainability and resilience. During the discussions on the priority areas for the review, countries expressed a strong interest in the issue of sustainability and resilience. They also expressed a strong desire to see the revised principles reflect the growing challenges corporations face in managing climate-related and other ESG risks, but also opportunities. The addition of a separate chapter on sustainability and resilience ensures high visibility and easy accessibility to the changes proposed on these issues. It also groups the recommendations together to clearly show the interconnections between disclosure, shareholder rights, the role of stakeholders, and the board of directors' responsibilities related to sustainability matters. The revisions strongly support the adherence of jurisdictions to internationally recognized standards that facilitate the comparability of sustainability-related disclosure across companies and markets. This is critical for the efficiency of capital markets. The revisions also aim at ensuring that verifiable metrics are disclosed if a company publicly sets a sustainability-related goal or target. As we say, what can't be measured can't be understood, so we need to really get that verifiable metric disclosed. Investors should be able to assess the credibility and progress of a company toward meeting an announced goal or target. So it's not enough just to set the goal, we need to really understand how it's being achieved. On materiality, the revisions clarify that information should be considered material if it can reasonably be expected to influence an investor's investment or voting decision. The investors are therefore identified as the primary users of corporate disclosure. However, the revisions also recognize that this definition of materiality may include matters that are critical to a company's key stakeholders or a company's influence on non-diversifiable risks, even when their short-term financial relevance is not evident. A last point on sustainability disclosure is to move towards external assurance as a long-term consideration for regulators. Sustainability-related disclosure reviewed by an independent, competent, and qualified attestation service provider can enhance investor confidence in the information disclosed. Next slide, please. And of course, we cannot talk about sustainability and disclosure without looking at the responsibility of the board. When fulfilling their key functions, boards are increasingly ensuring that material sustainability matters are also considered. For instance, boards may assess if and how sustainability matters affect companies' risk profiles. Such assessments may also relate to key executive remuneration and nomination, or whether a board committee for sustainability matters would be useful. Along these same lines, the revision highlights the importance for the board of long-term thinking, which may be supported, for instance, by the adoption of the business judgment rule, or a similar safe harbor that protects board members against litigation if a decision was made in good faith with due diligence. This allows directors to assume the risk of a decision that is expected to benefit the company in the long term, but which could eventually be unsuccessful. Still on sustainability, the revisions seek to promote dialogue between a company, its shareholders, and stakeholders on sustainability matters. And this is really important in informing management's decision-making process and in building investor trust in a long-term approach to business strategy development. While such dialogue may be useful for a range of issues, this is particularly important for decisions to improve a company's sustainability and resilience, which can represent short-term cash outflows while generating long-term benefits. Next slide, please. So moving on from this topic to another issue I mentioned, which is new to the principles, and where there's significant emphasis also given the rise in concentrated ownership and company groups. So the new principles address the revisions by seeking to promote a clear regulatory framework for company groups, by recommending that jurisdictions develop a definition and criteria for the oversight of such structures. The new principles also aim to ensure that the rights of minority shareholders are protected by increasing disclosure of capital structures, group structures, and their control arrangements in company groups. They also seek to improve risk management by ensuring disclosure on large or complex risks related to company groups, and by ensuring board members access to key information on group activities. And finally, they also seek to improve disclosure of related party transactions, very common in groups, by better identifying all related parties in complex group structures and addressing potential conflicts of interest. Next slide, please. The other topic that is given more emphasis in the revised principles is institutional investors and stewardship. A number of recommendations are related to stewardship codes and corporate governance codes. I don't know if you have a stewardship code in Mauritius, but this is increasingly common. The principles reflect the growing use of stewardship codes, which have become well-established practice in many jurisdictions to complement other disclosure requirements for institutional investors on their engagement and voting policies. In terms of the important role played by soft law, it is also worth adding that the revised principles emphasize the role of corporate governance codes in building consensus around new corporate governance practices. Also, the revisions reflect the increasing use of ESG indices, data, and ratings by institutional investors, and their use as indirect engagement tools for them, and they aim to minimize conflicts that may arise. Finally, the revised principles highlight the importance of the transparency of the methodologies used by service providers that produce ratings and indices. Next slide, please. Now, again, a topic that's, I think, close to your hearts given the focus of the Mauritius Institute of Directors, what has been changed in terms of board responsibilities and duties. The revisions cover several issues. As mentioned earlier, given the increasing complexity under which boards function today. First, the revised principles address this complexity. Notably, they differentiate between the mandatory establishment of the audit committee, while the nomination and remuneration committees are established on a comply or explain basis. The principles also recognize the increasing role of risk technology, or sustainability committees, and they clearly emphasize flexibility in the establishment of these committees. Second, the revised principles fully consider all diversity criteria, and they recognize the value of gender diversity, which may be enhanced through several mechanisms and policy measures. I was happy to hear the minister say this is one of the focuses of the new code. Third, they emphasize board functions related to risk management. And finally, they provide additional guidance regarding remuneration, notably on the disclosure of remuneration levels and the use of sustainability indicators. Next slide, please. So this is just a continuation of the of some of the issues I mentioned earlier. Next, please. Now, in digital technologies, this is another important issue that is growing, is the use of digital technologies. They are being used in many jurisdictions to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of supervision and enforcement processes related to corporate governance. However, their use also creates a number of risks. The revised principles address these opportunities and risks. Importantly, the revisions promote a technology-neutral approach, and this is to reflect that regulators in most jurisdictions consider such an approach important so as not to impair innovation. The revised principles also deal with remote participation in virtual and hybrid shareholder meetings. And finally, the revised principles aim to ensure board responsibilities for digital security risks in terms of disclosure and risk management, reflecting the importance of the management of such risks. Next slide, please. Finally, the principles address some issues related to corporate debt and bondholders. The corporate sector's indebtedness has increased significantly, though it is important to pay greater attention to the role and rights of bondholders in corporate governance. The revised principles include a new recommendation to address the increasing importance of corporate debt and bondholders in markets, their rights, and their importance in corporate governance. They also address the importance of disclosure of material information on debt contracts, including the risk of non-compliance and covenants. The timely disclosure of material information, including the impact of the most significant risks, is necessary for investors to understand a company's business risk. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes my presentation on the main changes in the principles. I wish we had more time, but I really appreciate your patience. And the OECD really looks forward to supporting Mauritius in your corporate governance journey, especially supporting the forthcoming revision of the Corporate Governance Code. And we really hope that the new G20 OECD principles of corporate governance can be a benchmark for this work going forward. Thank you so much.
It has an important role to play there. Arnaud, any comments or concern on that type of comments from the reports? Would you like to add?
Many thanks for having me here on this panel, Sheila, and all people around in the room. Alors, je vais shifter en français, si ça ne vous dérange pas. Je n'ai pas de commentaire particulier, si ce n'est que peut-être que la baisse relative de notre ranking est due certainement à une hausse des autres pays qui font partie du benchmark de l'index MIoD. Je suis d'accord avec Jean-Pierre qu'il y a énormément d'efforts qui ont été faits par le secteur privé et même par le secteur public, même s'il y a encore énormément de chemin à parcourir pour ces state-owned companies. Et c'était en effet rassurant d'entendre le ministre avoir un discours proactif sur le sujet. Ceci étant dit, il y a encore beaucoup de chemin à parcourir. Et je crois que l'émergence d'un troisième code qui va incorporer donc les nouveaux trends va certainement aider à lisser Mauritius Inc. et tout le corporate world à un niveau plus élevé de disclosure, de gouvernance. Et c'est certainement pour le mieux. Et aussi, partage l'avis de Jean-Pierre, j'ai la chance d'avoir aussi un certain nombre d'administrateurs et de partenaires qui viennent de l'étranger. Et quelque part, la qualité de la gouvernance que nous avons à l'île Maurice, et certainement pour les compagnies cotées, et plus particulièrement pour la compagnie que je gère, et en tout cas à les écouter of international standard. Donc c'est une bonne nouvelle.
Merci. You wanted to...
Can I just add a comment? We are concerned by those comments from the Ibrahim report. And the CCG is proactively coming out with a lot of reports like the assessment report of the scorecard last year and this year to show proof to the international organizations that we are working out all, we are measuring. And the idea of this DEI charter, which we'll be launching very soon, is precisely again to capture the data you will be sending us, to create a baseline, which will come out in a report to showcase to the international organizations that we are well aware of all those principles and that we are acting on them.
Thank you. Namita, coming to you, you also represent the business community at the MCCI. You would agree corporate governance is not about ticking the box exercise, but it's more to it. Yet we have the impression that there might be some sort of resistance when it comes to transparency and proper disclosures. Why is there such a resistance to do more than is actually required, and especially in terms of transparency, reporting, and why do we need prescriptive measures to enforce certain transparency and reporting?
Thank you, Danny. First of all, thank you very much, Danny and Sheila, for having me on this panel. As you mentioned, definitely, this is, I would say, generally human behavior. Generally, when there is change, you tend to resist to change because you don't really know what's going to happen, what it impacts, what it entails for you, what's the impact. That's a human behavior, first of all. But going back to what you're saying, resistance to change can be overcome if you have proper guidance, proper awareness campaigns like MIoD has been doing. I think that's very, very laudable. Loads of capacity building and training. And more importantly, I would say it's essential to make it simple. You know, if we're over prescriptive, I mean, Jean-Pierre and myself, we shared last week, we were at the B20 in New Delhi. And again, what came up very, very prominently in terms of the standard setting bodies and the norms standard setting bodies internationally, be it OECD or any other, if you make it too complex, it becomes extremely difficult for business to adopt. You know, generally, automatically, like you rightly mentioned, there is a natural tendency to say, oh gosh, that's too complex, you know. There was one of the speakers who shared an example from the UK, and the standard was hardly comprehensible. Coming back to what we're saying, if you keep it simple, which the common lay person can understand, even if corporates are doing it, obviously you've got your professionals who understand, but you need to bring it to the level where the normal, you know, general employee can understand it. And also, very importantly, I would say, understand the purpose. Why are we doing it? If we're just doing box ticking to comply to what regulators or standard setting bodies are saying, then it doesn't make sense. We need to bring it very, very much to understanding of everyone so that each and every stakeholder understands, okay, I need to do that, yes, and that's why I'm doing it, and I feel partly to this. This is what I would like to see. Yeah. Coming back to the prescriptive method, I think prescriptions are good to start as a baseline. However, if we're too prescriptive, it can defeat the purpose. Personally, I would rather say it should be probably a bigger prescription, but more importantly, like we've seen a bit earlier, it has to be principle-based. That's my take.
Opening a chapter on the boards and the directorship, we can see some directors on several boards, public and private, and sometimes we wonder whether they are devoting enough time and whether they are effectively fulfilling the responsibilities on these boards. And what would you, in your view, would be the ideal number of directorship should a board member have, and also the maximum tenure? We heard the minister say earlier that there's an expectation, changes coming on the tenure and also the directorship position. It's a very topical one, so what's your view?
Danny, merci. Je ne sais pas si, comme on dit, les cordonniers sont les mieux chaussés, mais certainement que la question a le mérite d'être posée. Alors, le nombre de directorships, encore une fois, je pense pas qu'il y ait un nombre spécifique. Je pense que c'est vraiment par rapport à la capacité de travail de la personne, du temps qu'elle va dévouer à sa tâche, du nombre de comités ou de sous-comités sur lesquels elle est, parce que si cette personne n'est que sur le board, je dirais que c'est quelque part plus simple. Si cette personne maintenant est présente sur les sous-comités, et on sait aujourd'hui que la puissance de la gouvernance et la capacité d'une compagnie à se développer, c'est à travers son board, mais également à travers ses sous-comités. Donc il y a un travail énorme qui est fait par les administrateurs sur ces sous-comités, qu'ils soient d'audit de risque, de rémunération, de nomination, de stratégie, aujourd'hui de digitalisation, sustainability, qui sont des nouveaux comités qui sont en place. Donc évidemment que c'est difficile de venir dire est-ce que c'est 2 boards, 3 boards, 4 boards. Je dirais que c'est vraiment à la personne à juger sa capacité de s'impliquer et à être un bon directeur pour cette compagnie. La deuxième partie de la question, c'est tenure. Alors, on a le principe, comme vous le savez dans le code, qu'un directeur indépendant perd son indépendance après 9 ans. Donc, certes, je crois que c'est important d'avoir cette rotation. Mais encore une fois, je suis assez peu attaché à ces principes trop dogmatiques qui viennent dire qu'après 9 ans, on n'est plus indépendant. On peut l'être pendant 20 ans, on peut ne pas l'être après 1 an. Et quelque part, encore une fois, je pense qu'à travers les assessments qu'on fait des boards, des directeurs et de leur capacité à amener ce dont ils sont là pour, nous permet de dire s'ils doivent être renouvelés ou pas, d'ailleurs. Et c'est pour moi exactement le même principe. Je sais que ça fera certainement polémique parce que je vois énormément de femmes dans la salle. Est-ce qu'il faut aujourd'hui légiférer, et c'est le cas, pour avoir 25% de femmes sur un conseil d'administration? Je dirais pourquoi pas 50? Pourquoi 25? Donc quelque part, tous ces principes sont quelque part nécessaires pour faire évoluer la société, pour faire évoluer la gouvernance. Mais je ne m'attacherai pas à dire que 25% c'est le bon nombre, 9 ans c'est le bon tenure, ou 4 même directorship c'est le bon mode. Je crois qu'il faut vraiment appliquer un jugement et tester donc la qualité de ce directeur et de son implication tout au long de son mandat.
No, I totally agree, and I believe that it converge and it boils down to each and every individual as a director. And I always say that each director needs to be honest, transparent, whether they have the ability to take additional board position. It's not about the organization, but it's more on the individual responsibility. Transiting to you, Jean-Pierre, I think the same question, any views before I move on to the next question, because you also had a big conglomerate. Do you have that issue?
Well, flexibility is always important. That said, it's true that legislation pushes us, like it is the case right now for women on the board, and so it has also its good aspect. But I think that what we want is effective boards, and that there's valuable contributions, and we want people to be able to self-regulate themselves in terms of tenure and in terms of independence. Because the independent directors have a key role to play on boards.
Yeah, and talking about directors' responsibility, it is their job to ask difficult and hard questions, right? And even if they are uncomfortable, do you think that directors in the country, both from the public and private, asking tough questions, or do you get a sense that is they a bit too complacent? And is there any fear factor involved into the way they operate?
Well, I think it's not about asking the hard questions. I think it's about asking the right questions in the specific circumstances. And from my point of view, the nomination committee of a board has got a key role to play in structuring the board accordingly. I don't think we have space on board for people who just listen. I think that doesn't serve any purpose. What we want is a strong contribution, and we want a mix of skills so that we can all progress, especially as we are now talking about ESG, and AI. There's so many new aspects that are brought to the board table, but we need the competences at that level. And then I would say that the chairman has got a key role to play in making sure that he can tap, the various directors for their knowledge. So I think that combination will make sure that we have the right dynamism and the right questions asked.
Thank you. Namita, turning out to you, we have noticed a lot of activism recently into the public and shareholders, and it is a trend that we've seen globally, and the necessity to bring good corporate governance to a higher level, to a better standard. So do you think that we need activism, shareholders activism, and I would say sort of protest or engagement to drive companies to be a bit more compliant to governance? Why do we need that?
Thank you for the question, Danny. I think shareholder activism or stakeholder activism, if you take it in the larger sense, are important, definitely. Especially in the context in which we are operating right now. The environment is changing, geopolitics are changing, climate change, ESG, there are so many requirements right now. All together, if you look at the ecosystem, there is so much of change happening, multidimensional, that a company cannot do business as it used to be. Boards, like we say generally, or even employees, both levels, be it management or boards, it's essential that we take stock of what's happening within this ecosystem. And like you mentioned, activism, be it at shareholder level or stakeholder, taking in the wider sense, are probably an ingredient which would drive boards to be much more effective, definitely. And we also look at the other perspective, activism, especially nowadays. If you look at what's happening in the digital space, social media, reputation, brand image, if boards are not careful, this can really do loads of harm to the corporates. So activism is important to kind of imbibe, let me use this word, a bit of pressure so that boards are much more effective and efficient, and this pressure can also decoulate at a level lower in terms of management. So I think it does. Shareholders' activism also is important because it's the duty of care that you need to ensure that the boards have and the management has. I think that's very important. That's my thing.
So what you're saying that the activism is a necessary element to ensure the balance in terms of it's a good pressure in terms of what corporate needs to ensure that they stay on course. This is what you're saying.
Yeah, I would say it's not a necessary evil, but it's a good to have thing probably, just to make sure that we stay on track as well.
All right. One of the topical aspects we've seen, Arno, is that we are now exposed to a lot of noise through the media, and a lot of cases are now exposed in the general public with the explosion of social media. What is the weight of corporate governance element in investors' decision, taking both the perception and reality? It's a tough call for investors because sometimes it's difficult to make that difference between the perception and the reality. How would investors in your space take into account the corporate governance element into their investment decision?
Dany, bonne question. Alors, je vais commencer par un constat qui est celui certainement d'un manque de maturité des investisseurs à l'île Maurice. Je crois qu'on a un stock exchange qui fonctionne et qui n'a pas beaucoup de profondeur et qui ne permet pas vraiment de sortir les vraies valeurs des sociétés, à la baisse à la hausse d'ailleurs. Et donc, je pense qu'il y a un problème de compréhension des business models à travers cette communauté d'investisseurs qui est très peu informée ou très peu au courant de ce qui se passe. Alors, vous me direz, elle n'est pas au courant, pourquoi? Ma réponse à cela, c'est que je pense qu'il y a un désintérêt des investisseurs par rapport à l'information qui est donnée. Et si on regarde l'évolution des rapports annuels et du disclosure depuis allons dire une quinzaine d'années, le MIoD il y a 15 ans, disons qu'on prenne il y a 15 ans de cela, et aujourd'hui, je veux dire, ça n'a rien à voir. Le rapport annuel d'il y a 15 ans, c'était un PNL, un balance sheet, une page du Chairman's Report et une page du Chief Executive Report, et ça s'arrêtait là. Aujourd'hui, un rapport annuel fait 300 et plus de pages, avec énormément de disclosure, énormément d'informations, et malheureusement, on ne voit pas la communauté d'investisseurs utiliser ça comme un outil. J'ai la chance, à travers mon groupe, d'assister ou de présider à certaines assemblées annuelles une fois par an. Au mieux, on n'en dit personne. Au pire, une ou deux. Il y a toujours la MCD qui est là, qui représente quelques proxys, et merci encore à chaque fois aux gars de la MCD. Mais c'est assez désastreux. Et quelque part, je ne sais pas ce qu'il faut faire pour justement intéresser cette communauté d'investisseurs. Alors, est-ce que c'est du activisme? Je ne suis pas tellement sûr, même si on a vu des révolutions faire changer des choses. Donc, pour revenir à votre question, je pense qu'il y a effectivement énormément de bruit qui peut être fait à travers les réseaux sociaux, mais on a la chance, avec Maurice, d'avoir des gens qui passent très vite à autre chose. Donc, il suffit que le bruit arrive au mauvais moment, ou au bon moment pour que, bref, on n'en prenne pas compte. Mais quelque part, au-delà de ce bruit de ces réseaux sociaux, je crois qu'il s'agit vraiment de la formation de l'investisseur qui aujourd'hui reste relativement légère par rapport au nombre d'informations qui est donné par les compagnies listées en tout cas.
Yeah, no, I mean that's great. I mean, Jean-Pierre, in terms of international investors' perspective, how do they look at this corporate governance aspect? I know we have a big annual report of 380 pages, so...
I mean, I would agree with Arno that the depth of the annual report in Mauritius doesn't reflect the questions that we have at the AGM or analyst meetings. That said, I think it's a very good principle guiding us as a corporation. And I think that from the international investors' perspective, it is extremely important. And I think we are actually ahead of the curve in that respect. We know that, for instance, on the ESG front, I think that many companies have actually taken the lead. I mean, pending more guidance with the corporate governance code. I think we are actually very much in advance of what we can see in many other jurisdictions. So we have to make sure at the same time that a company is sustainable only if it is profitable and derives very good margin. So the other end of the spectrum, we mustn't go too far. But I think from the international perspective, yes, it has its value, and we are there.
Thank you.